Today we're going to look at kidney anatomy, discuss the three basic functions of the kidney, and also look at the functions of the various parts of the nephron. So the renal artery delivers oxygen-rich blood to the kidney, and this blood also contains urea, which, as we discussed in the previous lecture, in mammals is what ammonia, the byproduct of the catabolism of nitrogen-containing compounds, is converted into. And urea is a waste product that is disposed of in the urine, which drains from each kidney through the ureter into the urinary bladder, and then urine is passed out of the body through the urethra. And as we see on the image on the right, that shows juxtamedullary and cortical nephrons, we see that the Bowman's capsule and the convoluted tubules are in the renal cortex, whereas the loops of Henle and the collecting ducts extend down into the renal medulla. And the nephron is the filtering unit of the kidney, and the filtrate that is filtered out of the blood eventually becomes urine, which is fed into the renal pelvis via the collecting duct. And then from the renal pelvis, the urine drains into the ureter. And then this slide is just to remind us that there are thousands of nephrons in the kidney. Now, the three basic functions of the kidney are filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Filtration takes place in the glomerulus, and that's where fluid in the blood is basically pushed through the glomerular capillaries into the Bowman's capsule space. That filtrate then enters the tubules of the nephron. Reabsorption is the selective movement or recovery of important solutes out of the filtrate back into the blood. And the process of secretion is the function of the movement of foreign substances and waste substances from the blood into the filtrate, so then they can be eliminated from the body. So let's go ahead and take a look at blood flow in the kidney, and this is also going to, of course, involve the filtration step. So as I stated earlier, the renal artery delivers blood to the kidney, and blood leaves the kidney via the renal vein. Blood enters the glomerulus through the afferent arteriole, and due to high blood pressure in the glomerulus, fluids and small molecules are forced out of the blood into the Bowman's capsule space. And this is what we refer to as the filtrate. That filtrate then enters the proximal convoluted tubule, moves through the loop of Henle into the distal convoluted tubule, and drains into a collecting duct, which leads to the ureter. A little bit later in this lecture, we're going to talk specifically about what happens to the various substances that are contained in the filtrate and when different substances are going to be recovered from the filtrate so that they can be returned to circulation. Red blood cells, white blood cells, and large proteins don't leave the glomerulus and enter into the Bowman's capsule. Instead, they stay in the capillaries, and that blood then drains into the efferent arteriole. From there, the blood enters the peritubular capillaries, which is this web-like network of capillaries that runs alongside the tubules of the nephron. And it's via these capillaries that the substances that are reabsorbed from the nephron tubules have the opportunity to enter back into circulation. Now, the average person has about 5 liters of blood, and the kidneys process approximately 2,000 liters of blood each day. And during that process, 180 liters of water leaves the blood and enters the glomerular filtrate. You can understand then that most of the water and dissolved solutes need to be returned to the blood by reabsorption. Otherwise, that would be a lot of water one would have to drink in a day. Now, the majority of the reabsorption of water is carried out by the proximal convoluted tubule, and then the remainder is carried out by the descending loop of Henle and the collecting duct. Reabsorption of glucose and amino acids takes place in the proximal convoluted tubule and is driven by active transport via carrier proteins. Now, to better understand reabsorption, let's go ahead and take a closer look at what goes on in the various regions of the nephron. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the proximal convoluted tubule is responsible for the reabsorption of most of the water, and in fact, 2/3 of the sodium chloride that's contained in the filtrate and 2/3 of the water is reclaimed in this region of the nephron. The sodium is actively transported out, and the chloride, based on its negative charge, passively follows the positively charged sodium ions, and then water passively follows via osmosis. And then this is also the region where glucose and amino acids are reabsorbed. So after the proximal convoluted tubule, we've seen the reabsorption of approximately 120 liters of the 180 liters of water that's entered the filtrate. Now, the average human urinates anywhere from 1 to 2 liters a day. And it's the gradient of increasing osmolarity that's created by the loop of Henle that results in the formation of a countercurrent multiplier system that results in the reabsorption of the additional water, which would mean that we wouldn't have to drink 60 liters of water a day and excrete 60 liters of urine a day. Now, in a basic sense, the way this works is that the ascending portion of the loop of Henle, which is the portion on the right that approaches the distal tubule, is impermeable to water. However, sodium is actively transported out of this region of the loop of Henle, and chloride follows passively based on its charge. So this creates a hypertonic condition in the renal medulla, and due to the hypertonicity of that interstitial space, water is drawn out of the descending loop of Henle, which is permeable to water. And the descending loop of Henle is the portion that's on the left side. In addition to that, this hypertonic condition also results in the passive transport of water out of the collecting duct as well. Now, due to the sodium and chloride reabsorption or transport out of the filtrate that takes place in the ascending loop of Henle, the filtrate that enters the distal convoluted tubule is hypotonic, and so there is passive water loss into the cortex space. In addition to that, the filtrate then drains into the collecting duct, which travels once again through the outer and inner medulla, which is hypertonic, and so we see increased water leaving the filtrate there. Now, it's also during this leg of the filtrate's journey that we see a mechanism for regulation of the loss of water, and that's carried out by antidiuretic hormone. Now, antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is secreted by the posterior pituitary, and that secretion increases when an animal needs to conserve water. And what ADH does is it causes the insertion of additional water channels, or aquaporins, in the plasma membranes of the cells of the collecting duct, which means that the collecting duct cells have an increased capacity to allow for water to move from the filtrate into the interstitial space so that it can be reabsorbed in those peritubular capillaries and retained in the body. So then the secretion function of the kidney is simply the movement of waste products from the blood into the filtrate, and those waste products have been going along on this journey in the filtrate along with all the water and all the ions that have been reabsorbed. And then ultimately, those waste products are moved into the ureter and end up draining into the bladder, at which point they are excreted. Now, the kidneys are also involved in maintaining electrolytes and the acid-base balance by reabsorbing protons and bicarbonate, among other things, but our primary focus with this class is just looking at the function of filtration, reabsorption, which we did do in addition to looking at the anatomy of the kidney, and then also taking that deeper dive into the specific functions of each part of the nephron.